We can't imagine having $40 billion. I mean, you'd have to give $1 million away every day of your life to last. How long would it last?
When you have so much money,
Yes.
it must be difficult to know how to behave in the real world with people who can't imagine having that much money.
I think it's impossible. I think it would be impossible.
But you said she's not normal.
No.
What do you mean by that?
Well, she doesn't wipe up. She just lives in a castle, in a bucket full of money. And it's hard to be normal like that. It's hard to know who likes her because she's you, because she's who she is, who likes her because they want. I mean, the number of requests she gets for money. And unlike most people, Gina's a lot more harsh judge of that than I am.
Gina Rinehart has been Australia's richest person for 11 of the last 15 years. This is now her 6th year in a row, an unbroken streak that shows no signs of being under threat. As long as the iron keeps flowing, Gina and her company, Hancock Prospecting, will continue their bonanza in the Pilbara.
If she'd done what Lang had done, it would still be in the ground.
From Guardian Australia, I'm Sarah Martin, and this is Gina, a podcast series about Gina Rinehart and all the bitter rivalries, court battles, and family conflicts behind the money.
How better to crush somebody than to do it through litigation? Because Gina Rinehart had enough money to run court cases forever.
Can you imagine two more diametrically opposed personalities than Rose and Gina Rinehart?
No. You may as well put two bears in a ring and go, we'll fight to the death, because that's what they do, but they'd fight differently.
It's about winners and losers and answering a fundamental question. Is Gina Rinehart a mining heiress, or is she a self-made mining magnate?
Certainly there was a lot of fires, but there was always going to be wealth in Hancock Prospecting because the Rio royalties were going to last for many years.
Well, forever, right?
Forever's a long time.
This is episode 3, Love and Money. So perhaps just to start, can you tell us your name?
John Langley Hancock.
You've actually had a few names in your life, haven't you?
I have, yeah. Probably one of the few men that have. Started as Hayward. Then my stepfather adopted me, so on my birth certificate it's actually Rinehart. And then I changed it by deed poll in my, early 20s to Hancock.
John Hancock is Gina Rinehart's firstborn son, and he has a complicated relationship with his mother. If you know anything about John, it's likely that you'll know he's in a very long-running legal dispute with his mother. We'll be getting to that in the next episode. Today, John is 49 years old, living in London, married with 3 daughters. So, I thought perhaps the best place to start is at the start.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of good childhood memories as well, which really centred on the Pilbara. They're the favourite ones, going to the gorges, swimming. My mum would be there. My grandfather would sometimes come. But mainly it was just the 3 of us, my mum and my sister Bianca and I.
He remembers his grandfather, Lang Hancock, his famous prospecting stories and the documentaries they used to watch about his family's legacy.
Lang would bring business people from around the world, politicians, young political figures. I remember he'd bring up young Liberals and things. And we'd have a barbecue dinner and we'd set up chairs around low tables, all outside. And then as the night went on, sort of about 9 p.m, the movie projector would come out. I didn't really watch a lot of movies, but I used to love watching those movies.
Lang Hancock is 48. He's had a lucky life, and in the search for minerals, luck is what you need. There'll always be room for the man with a hunch.
What are your earliest memories of him?
Very big figure. It surprised me when I saw footage later that he wasn't actually that tall, but I guess that's a kid. I just thought he was larger than life. He did get angry a couple of times, but generally I always saw him very happy and laughing. He had a great sense of humour. I wish I could remember some of his jokes, or if it was just sort of wit, or he was very magnetic. He was a great storyteller. He'd take us in the old Land Cruiser over the rocky roads and get the geological hammer out and show everyone, oh, this is basically solid iron, high grade, 68%, the best there is. So, yeah, it was just in his blood.
The first big change in John's life happens when he's just 3 years old, in 1979, when his parents separate. And when his dad, Greg Milton, who is briefly known as Greg Hayward, leaves.
Obviously, when there's been reporting about Hayward, the idea was that Greg changed his name so it was a bit more like Hancock. Is that your understanding, or is that...
I'm not sure.
You don't know the story of that?
No. But it's true. He did change his name.
How do you feel he was treated?
Well, I think he was treated poorly. But I think that's all I want to say about that.
That's fine.
Not long after the divorce, Gina Rinehart meets the love of her life. He's an American tax lawyer called Frank Rinehart, who had recently moved to Australia. They meet through infamous Queensland Premier Joe Bjelke-Petersen, a friend of the family, and they hit it off. They would have 2 children together, Ginia and Hope.
Gina was 28 and Rinehart was 65. So, there's a significant age gap there, as you can imagine. To marry someone who could have been her father, I think, tells us a lot about her psyche.
Debbie Marshall is an investigative journalist and author who wrote a biography of Gina and her dad. You heard from her in episode 1.
She was used to a man who was strong and who was older, that she could actually learn from, which she did.
Proudest time of my life was he wanted to marry me, and we got married. We had 2 beautiful daughters, and somebody told me recently they were my golden years. My mother adored Frank. I wouldn't say that my father was as thrilled as my mother was.
Lang hated him, absolutely hated him. Lang was, putting it mildly, utterly horrified at the union. He thought that Jenny was too young, her groom was too old, but she was determined. She was determined to do what she wanted to do.
What was his personality like?
Quite demanding, I believe, quite tough. He was convicted of tax fraud in 1977, so we may take something from that. Maybe the man wasn't as honest as he could have been. He received a 1-year suspended jail sentence and was barred briefly from practising law. I think, like Gina, he was a man who liked his own way.
Lang and Frank didn't get along, is that accurate?
I wasn't so much aware of that dynamic growing up, but in paperwork and his correspondence to Gina, that is plainly evident. There's a bunch of stuff I've found out about him since that I don't think I need to go into, but he wasn't everything that was broadcast about him. So his view of Lang was country bumpkin, wasn't great at negotiating contracts or whatever. I don't think that was valid. But anyway, that became a source of contention.
And so your relationship with your mum at this time is, how would you describe it?
Certainly when we were a 3-person family, and she will remember me saying, I wish we could be a 3-person family, which was also objecting to Frank coming into the family and things all changing and whatever. There was certainly things that I don't like about early childhood. It was probably common-ish in that era, but there was a bit of fairly harsh discipline handed out, which went beyond, in reflection, the norm.
It's been reported that Frank Rinehart was physically abusive towards John.
What we do know is that Frank was very controlling, very tough, very hard, and having met John on a few occasions, he's not that sort of man. So he would have found it very, very difficult. And also with a mother who was tough as well. I mean, for example, when John was at university, he rang her one day and said, look, you know, I need some money. I haven't got enough food. I'm hungry. And she said, well, have you got tomato sauce in the pantry? Well, if you have, make some soup. There was no money forthcoming. She was really, really tough. When they were growing up, they had to do chores. She made sure there were chores, that they weren't given handouts.
But otherwise, there was also loving times. She would come to watch my swimming races and do things that normal mothers would. And so I always say in that period there was good and bad. We had lovely family holidays together. We were very close, and probably particularly me with her.
Frank and Gina decide to move to the States. They're married there in 1983. It's a Vegas wedding. Lang refuses to go.
So this is when we start to see the relationship with Gina really starting to not just show signs of strain, but really, really crumbling as the decade went on.
But she has her own life to lead, and she married an American. And in her case, I mean, she's gone to America. And she can't run the place from America, so I've got to make other plans.
When Lang would come to Sydney, we'd always meet at his apartment, Circular Quay. He had the sucks of salt, you know, those big plastic containers, and I'd bring the barbecue chook. And with a bit of newspaper on the table, we'd sit there and discuss the meaning of life.
John Singleton is an advertising legend in Australia. He was one of Lang Hancock's closest friends. They met through a shared love of libertarian politics. He's also a close friend of Gina's, having watched her grow up. I feel like libertarians will put a lot of salt on their chicken.
We did. We did. We were not too interested in blood pressure warnings. So
in 1983, while Gina's overseas getting married, back home her mum's health is failing. Hope has breast cancer and is getting a lot sicker.
Beautiful lady, wonderful, ethereal-looking lady. Seemed to have a glow around her, a halo effect. And she had this terrible sickness that just made her weaker and weaker and weaker. And as she got weaker, her skin got thinner and thinner and therefore more translucent. What little time I spent with her was just taking some flowers into her, saying, how are you, Hope? And look after my Langley. They were a lovely couple. They were just fantastic.
She passed when I was 5 or 6, which was devastating for me because she was just such a wonderful lady. It's a weird thing that you remember, but she was buttering me a slice of, she knew that I liked the fairy bread, hundreds and thousands white bread. And I was like, oh, Nana, I can do that for you. And she's like, no, I want to do it for you. So I could sense the love. If I can pinpoint a start of the tragedy of our family, her passing would be it. That really, changed things.
Because of Lang's later relationship, or because her influence wasn't there?
Because that left Lang alone. There's actually video documentary, which I can't find a copy of anymore. And Lang is saying he was lonely.
Until Rose came along, which hopefully we don't get to.
Don't worry, we're going to get to that.
Okay.
After the death of her mother, Gina puts an ad in the paper for a housekeeper for Lang at his Perth mansion. It reads, attractive conditions are offered. 3 weeks after Hope's death, a 34-year-old woman from the Philippines turns up for work. She was the only applicant.
He really was a dirty bushman, and he had no manners, and he wasn't polished. He was the exact opposite of what I thought a man of wealth would be.
Her name is Rose Laxon, now Rose Porteous. Almost immediately, Rose and Lang begin a relationship.
That really made me curious, you know.
Here they are on 60 Minutes in 1986, talking about their new love.
So curiosity killed the cat and I fell in love with him. Sweetheart, God. Oh.
Gina is furious. So Gina immediately sees Rose as a threat.
Rose was a threat.
The real source of contention was Gina concerned about Rose and what Rose's wants were out of this relationship.
The rivalry between Gina and Rose becomes legendary. It dominates headlines for much of the 1990s. It was a soap opera playing out in real life.
Gina had every right to see Rose as a threat. Rose had won her father's heart. There was a gaping hole in her father's heart after he'd lost his beloved Hope.
I just showed him a world which never existed. It was there all along and he never realized it. Somebody had just to come into the picture and say, Lang Hancock, wake up.
Rose came along with all her sass. She was good looking. She was outspoken. She knew how to play the game. She was a smart cookie. Did she see Lang Hancock and see dollar signs? Work it out yourself. Did she see Lang Hancock and see a man she loved? Yes, I think she did. Was she a chameleon? Yes. Did she run rings around Gina Rinehart when it came to telling stories and holding her father captivated? Yes, she did. Gina had an adversary she couldn't get over. She had a bugbear and it was called Rose Porteous.
Everyone else hated her. And I thought, if Rose is making Lang happy, who am I?
John Singleton says he always saw Gina as the little girl he watched grow up. But now she was a married woman fighting with his close friend Lang, and he finds himself caught in the middle. So when that relationship broke down...
And it did.
Can you tell us about the perspectives from both camps?
Lang was broken-hearted. He would ring me 2 or 3 times a day.
He says that Lang would talk to him about Gina's hostility to Rose.
And he said, wouldn't you think, mate, it was always mate, wouldn't you think, mate, that Gina would want me to be happy the last few years of my life? I said, no, mate, because her whole relationship has been with you. She's been your partner. You think it's natural to have a little kid sitting on your knee and discussions about World War III and poverty and what can be done, what can't be done. Lang lived for Gina. I go back to my recollection being this tiny girl, instead of having Red Riding Hood, Cinderella stories, she was sitting there with Dr. Teller who invented the hydrogen bomb. Who knows how much your mind absorbs? 8, 10 years old through to teenage years. Her hobby was iron ore. I said, well, he's lonely, bastard. He was lonely. All hope she is. She was dying for 20-odd years. Lang has had no one apart from you, Gina, that would give him love and attention, affection. So you've got to give Rose some brownie points, but Gina's so, which is her strength, by the way. But I just thought it was a sadness. Gina still loves her dad. But I stuck with Lang and I explained to Gina, I said, Gina, I can't let your dad down if I walk from Lang's friendship.
Because of this, John Singleton says Gina didn't speak to him for a decade.
All I know is I had one discussion with Gina which she understood that we wouldn't have any communication if I was going to stick with Lang.
But she wasn't happy with you siding with Lang because she saw...
No, that's not... She wasn't unhappy. She accepted it as reasonable, that what I was doing was what I thought was right. Mm-hmm. If I thought it was right, well, fair enough. If she disagreed entirely, I'll see you later. But when Lang was gone, we'd resume, and we did.
Lang always had a reputation for being a simple bushman.
I know I've made the worst dressed 10 in Australia. I'm very annoyed that I got beaten. It's the worst.
He dressed unceremoniously in safari suits, ate Vegemite sandwiches and beef from a can.
He'd drink tea from billy cans out in the Pilbara. He could go to really posh restaurants in Paris and send the beef back and say, go and cook it.
He was a rough diamond. until Rose came along.
Suddenly, Lang acquired a Learjet. He'd never had one before. He acquired a Rolls Royce because I think Rose wanted one.
He asked me, how much do you need? And I say, yeah, 30, 40. If ever I run out and I'd want something real bad, he'd give it to me.
And I have to tell you, I've met Rose a few times. She's quite a fascinating character. You know, when you're in her company, you know you're alive. That's for sure.
So tell us, how bad does it get between Gina and Lang in this period?
Oh, terrible, really terrible. She wanted Rose Porteous out of her father's life. She wanted full control of what she believed was her destiny, of the company. She could see that these vast amounts of money were going out the door, being spent on Rose. And let's face it, there was a lot of money spent on Rose.
Gina reportedly demands that Lang sack Rose as his housekeeper and kick her out of the house. He obliges, but sets her up in her own apartment at the end of the street. And the relationship continues, as does Gina's attempts to separate them.
She was trying to get her father to get Rose out of the country, to go back to the Philippines.
In 1984, Lang helps Rose apply for permanent residency. And it's been revealed in letters sent between Lang and Gina that Gina and Frank attempted to have that application cancelled. Lang, in one of these letters, calls his daughter a slothful, vindictive and devious baby elephant. He says, "I'm glad your mother cannot see you now."
At that point, the chasm between father and daughter was bigger than any fissure you're ever going to get in the Pilbara earth. It never healed. She says that it healed later in his deathbed, but did it really?
A year later, Rose and Lang are married. On top of their wedding cake is a model train loading real iron ore onto a dump truck.
So I went to the wedding, I went on the cruise, little rubber ducky thing on Sydney Harbour.
John Singleton remembers it as a boozy night for everyone except Lang Hancock, who was a teetotaler.
She was drinking a lot.
Right.
I didn't mind a few. And he got this lovely ring.
He remembers the night ending in tears when Rose dropped her engagement ring overboard.
Which was worth 4 truckloads of something money. I don't know what it was worth. That was the end of the celebrations of the wedding. She was hysterical. Lang was bored stupid.
Did anyone jump in?
No.
Gina doesn't attend the wedding. She says she didn't even know it was happening until afterwards.
There is an ornamental pool in front, but we're going to put in a chuck of a big boulder of an iron ore.
As Rose says, the iron ore is his, the house is mine.
You're not relaxing here. You don't see a brick wall.
If the excesses of Lang and Rose's relationship was in need of a symbol, they found it in their new 17-room, ostentatious and opulent white-columned palace in a ritzy suburb of Perth. They had it built as a replica of the house from the movie Gone with the Wind, and it was called Prix d'Amour, the prize of love, or price of love.
When you walked in to the front door, there was a massive floor-to-ceiling photo of Rose.
Debbie Marshall remembers going there.
And she showed me into one of the rooms. I'll never forget it. This is Perth, so it's quite hot. You know, the winters don't get that cold. She had this vast catalogue of coats, all of which she'd bought from Paris or New York or London. But it was the same coat, just in every different colour. She had shoe racks that were bigger than my house. She bathed her poodles, I think they were, in Chanel perfume. She liked to show off the wealth.
Do you find him sexy?
Very, very sensual.
Completely irreverent. She went public, for example, and said that Langley George, as she always called him, Langley George and I made love 3 times a day. I mean, come on, Rose, too much information.
He is a very sensual man. I mean, he has to be married to me.
And we've got mirrors on our ceiling. God, can you imagine Gina listening to this sort of story? She would die. She was so private. She is so private. And here comes Rose Porteous, and she throws open the doors of the Hancock dynasty and tells stories.
It's a great outfit. What's that in your pocket?
I couldn't find the proper hanky that goes with it. So it's my knickers.
Where Georgina's left off, Rose has come in, and she's come in with a good deal of polish and that sort of thing, and it's very, very handy.
By 1985, the personal dispute has spilled over into the professional. Lang removes Gina as a director of Hancock Prospecting. She is replaced by Rose.
Is your daughter still involved in the business?
Not involved to the extent that she was. I keep her up to date with what I'm doing, because eventually she will have to run it, I would think.
And even when things were very sour between them, it was always his intention that Gina would take over, right?
So Gina left for America and Rose became a director of the company. And I think that's when probably it shot home to Gina that, maybe it's not guaranteed. Rose had no real understanding of the mining business, or not suited to it. But naturally, Gina had been involved. Certainly day one of Gina's life, she'd been involved. And Lang naturally included everyone in what he was doing. I mean, that was his drive and purpose, creating iron ore mines in the Pilbara. His dream was to have one of his own. His dream was to have his own mine.
Time and the wonders of a new relationship had done nothing to dampen Lang's desire to run his own mine. And now his ideas were becoming more and more creative. His boldest plan would bring him to the doorstep of one of Europe's darkest figures, Romanian communist dictator Nicolae Ceausescu.
Do you have faith in Romania? I have faith in the fact that they have a steel industry 2.5 times the size of Australia's. They've got no iron ore and they've got no money.
In 1987, the Burt government approves a deal that would have Lang start a long-desired mine in the Pilbara and ship iron ore to Romania. Lang flies himself there twice to visit the dictator. The first time in 1987, and the second a year later, this time with a newly elevated premier, Peter Dowding.
We got in Lang's little private plane stuffed with Rose's dresses. She was travelling first class via Air France. Piled ourselves into this tiny little plane and flew to Bucharest to meet Ceausescu.
I imagine that's not something you forget in a hurry.
That's not something you forget in a hurry. But he asked me to go with him. It was a bit of an adventure. And Cabinet said, well, you better go with him, so I did. I thought it was bizarre, crazy, and even more so when I met Ceausescu, who I thought was completely a wreck of a bloke.
So tell us about that. Where did you meet him and what was the conversation?
We were taken down underground to a set of tunnels and wandered around for about an hour, stopping at the entrance to these tunnels that went upstairs to buildings, and every now and then they'd get a radio message that said it's not this tunnel, it's the next tunnel. And anyway, finally we were taken upstairs and into this huge ballroom, and at the end of the ballroom was a bloke sitting in a very ornate chair with an ornate chair next to him, and he seemed to be sleeping. And I was led down to the second ornate chair next to him, and I sat there saying, hello, Mr. President, and I'm very pleased to meet you, and, honoured to be here. And he just sat there and sort of vacantly looked at the floor. And then finally at the end of the ballroom, the doors opened and a whole lot of the press rushed in with, those old Bolex cameras taking pictures of us. And suddenly Ceausescu woke up and started shouting what could have been abuse or something towards me. And then the press were told to go, and at the instant they shut the doors, he sort of fell asleep again. And that was my interaction with Ceausescu, which was really bizarre.
And so was the deal discussed? Did Lang present his...
No, not for an instant.
And did you ever have any discussions with Lang about the fact that he was dealing with someone who, obviously is widely regarded as a dictator?
Yeah, sure, we did. We had plenty of discussions about it. And in the end of the day, I said at the time to Lang, I thought the whole thing was a catastrophe. But Lang, with his indomitable enthusiasm for projects, could see something happening. But Lang was getting old at that point, and I don't think he was really that well. I think this was a sort of a last hurrah for him, and I really didn't understand why he was doing it. It seemed to be driven by a real force of ego. But Rose was there looking after him, or, good luck to him.
But before Lang's vision could be fully realised, he would once again be thwarted, this time by the Romanian Revolution.
It was a stark announcement by the Romanian television announcer.
Ceausescu was overthrown from power by the people in 1989.
Nicolae Ceausescu and his wife Elena were executed after a trial, they said. They'd been found guilty of genocide.
They were executed by firing squad on Christmas Eve.
And the intensity of Ceausescu's repression of religion and thought goes a long way to explaining his and his wife's execution.
A lot of correspondence between Lang and Gina has surfaced through court cases over the years, and it shows that at this time, Gina's attacks on Rose are growing more and more heated. She calls Rose a prostitute and an Oriental concubine. She says to Lang that you've been wiped out by a manipulating Filipino. In response, Lang threatens to forcibly acquire all of Gina's shares in the company. He writes, "I'm not prepared to have you in a position whereby you can destroy my life's workings to a point where I have nothing to leave you and the children in my will." He pleads for Gina to stop her barrage of criticisms. At one point he says, "I would be pleased if you would leave me alone to live the rest of my life in peace." Gina also accuses Lang of stooping to blackmail, lies and distortion against his own family. She threatens legal action and accuses him of taking money out of Hancock Prospecting in a conspiracy against shareholders. Do you think Gina learns from Frank about seeing things through a legal prism? Obviously, she's become very litigious. Does she get that from Frank?
Oh, I think undoubtedly that he taught her the ropes in terms of, don't let the world get to you. We have legal recourse. Sarah, you've got to remember how much money is involved here. I mean, this is eye-watering amounts of money. The average Joe Blow, we can't comprehend it. Once the litigation started, it just didn't stop.
Caught in the middle of all of this is a young John Hancock.
And obviously you're old enough at this point to be aware of what's going on. What was it like for you to be sort of in the centre of this incredible turmoil?
Yeah, it wasn't pleasant. It was very heated. It was not comfortable. And it was sad because it then was a schism. And what was I? 8, 9. And I felt the same way, because I'd been told all sorts of things about Rose, and likely they were true. And I didn't like that relationship either. And in my mind, it was her that had caused this problem and was causing problems. But that also meant that we never saw him. Gina said that Lang can just come on Christmases to visit us, which he did.
But you must have missed him as well if you...
Yeah. I think it was, looking back on it, was the worst thing. She should have allowed me to stay engaged with Lang and have that time. And Lang either wasn't allowed, as far as it was that I wasn't allowed to see him. She never offered me the chance to go and see him, or, there was no more spending time. It just became sort of like this dark cloud had settled over there. And it was strange as well because our house is opposite the river to the big house that was getting built.
John remembers being at home in Perth, looking out across the Swan River and been able to see the Prix de Moor mansion.
So I'd see it.
That's pretty harsh for a kid.
Yeah, certainly from having contact to no contact was difficult.
So all throughout this conflict with her stepmother, Gina has had her husband Frank by her side, her closest ally. But in 1990, in their 7th year of marriage, tragedy would tear them apart. Frank suffers a fatal heart attack.
He was certainly the finest person I've ever known. To lose someone you totally trust, who is better than you, much more intelligent and worldly than I was back in my 30s, it nearly killed me, because I loved my husband very much.
He was quite sudden, and Gina, of course, then returned to live in Australia. She always hated the States. She didn't want to live there. Back she came and, really revved up that Hancock empire.
And time is catching up with Lang Hancock as well. He's now a man in his 80s with serious health problems.
The sad part is that I was only properly there in the last few months, and I saw that Dad had very few people around him he could trust.
And with his death not far on the horizon, the House of Hancock descends into a frenzy over his estate. There were many changes and adjustments to Lang's will during this time, and many have speculated as to whether Lang knew what he was doing or whether he was just trying to keep the peace. But what is known is that Lang just wanted the fighting to stop.
He couldn't stop the flood of litigation that he knew was going to follow. The one thing he wanted was the two women in his life he loved most, Rose and Gina, to, if they couldn't at least reconcile, to shut up and get on with it. He said to them, "You have half each. It should be enough. Let me go in peace."
On the 20th of March 1992, from his deathbed at Prix de Moor, Lang signed a new document that effectively bankrupts his estate and hands control of all of the company's assets to Gina and her family. It's reported that Rose is so furious that she berates Lang, and the confrontation results in him taking out a restraining order against his wife on Gina's advice. But that restraining order would never be served, because the next morning, on the 27th of March 1992, Lang Hancock dies. How does he die?
He was 82, pulmonary heart disease, kidney failure. He was in the guest house at Prix de Moor, not in the main house. Rose was sleeping. His grandson, who adored him, John, was also in the guest house.
I got a phone call. Lang's Dada, grandfather, we called him Dada, is not well. I was there during that period. I was at the house when he unfortunately died and managed to spend some time.
Gina was with him, and I believe Lang's very long time chauffeur was with him in his dying moments. And some people told me that they heard him scream in the seconds before he died. John was in the guest house, as I said. He said he didn't hear that. I'll see if I can... Just give me 1 second, Sarah. Here it is. So I wrote, Lang Hancock's hour had come. Some say they heard him scream in the seconds before he died, a desolate primal scream which carried through his bedroom walls and was airborne by his tormented spirit back to the ancient ochre mountains of his beloved Pilbara, the haunting, mournful cry of a man who cannot keep death at bay. His once stocky body had withered, racked by sickness and despair. He was not ready, but no amount of money could buy him more time. By Hancock's own admission, he'd had a good innings, but none of that mattered now. His affairs were in disarray, the lawyers circling in a feeding frenzy, and the two women in his life, Gina and Rose, were poised to begin a bitter fight which he was now powerless to stop. I'm a sad way for a man who'd lived such a large life to die. His death started the most unedifying spectacle in so many ways.
The titans clash almost immediately. Even the morgue isn't spared from the chaos as a fight erupts over who gets to receive the body. 2 hearses, one from each woman, are left waiting.
Rose Hancock and her stepdaughter Gina Rinehart held separate memorial services for Lang Hancock today.
Rose Hancock arrived in style at a mass for her late husband. A few hundred friends waited for her inside Perth's St Mary's Cathedral. Across town, a bigger crowd was forming. This was the one the politicians and dignitaries chose. This was Gina Rinehart's farewell to her father. Both gatherings were sombre affairs.
As the funeral car was going into the cemetery, my mum spotted some flowers that Rose had put on, and she managed to withdraw them and throw them on the side, which I agree with. I also remember at our wake, there was a gentleman giving a speech, and by accident he said, I think he was talking about the Discovery flight, and he said, you know, on the Discovery flight, Lang with his wife, Rose, and I walked up and said, no, it's Lang and his wife, Hope. It's a deep, I don't know how to describe it.
Deeply acrimonious.
Yeah.
Then Gina wanted an inquest into her father's death, that she believed that Rose Porteous had hastened his death.
It was only in July of this year that we actually got access to the coroner's file, and as soon as we did, we considered that there were major deficiencies in the work that was done at the time and that an inquest should have been held.
Gina is convinced that Rose is responsible for the death of her father, and she claims she has the evidence to prove it. Gina says that Rose, quote, nagged him to death and subjected him to shrill screams and tantrums. Rose denies all of this and has famously said, "For anyone else it's a scream. For me, it's just raising my voice."
She wanted to crush Rose. How better to crush somebody than to do it through litigation? Because Gina Rinehart had enough money to run court cases forever.
Hell-bent on getting it, she starts lobbying politicians. She is relentless. It's an obsession that would last years.
Well, she knocked on quite a few doors, and she wanted to leave no stone unturned in getting to the bottom of what she thought was foul play in relation to her father's death.
Michael Yabsley, who you heard from in episode 2, is working for Gina at this time.
I always thought it was a long shot, but it's the invidious situation that people are placed in. You can say, no, I don't share the suspicions, but can I be absolutely certain? And the answer is no.
He remembers one day getting a call from a lawyer asking him to be a witness for a toxicity test on Lang Hancock's heart, liver and kidneys. I mean, it's an extraordinary request.
Amazingly, I declined. This, by this stage, had become the main game for Gina. You know, there are all sorts of tests carried out and, a vast amount of time and money spent on it.
Gina is denied a coronial inquest twice before she finally gets one in the year 2000 by Premier Richard Court, the son of Charles Court, Lang's longtime rival.
My son and I would like to say that all of our family are happy, that we hope to see truth and justice prevail. That's all I can say. Thank you.
The coronial proceedings are extraordinary. They are absolutely stranger than fiction. There are wild claims about Rose being involved in murder plots against Lang, ranging from poisonings to even hiring Filipino hitmen.
A contract killer or contract killers with the purpose of taking Lang out, or alternatively to assist her in some other way to kill him, including poisoning him.
The court hears sordid tales of drug abuse, voodoo spells, adultery. At one point, even that 5 white chickens were sacrificed on the night Lang died. But these testimonies would be essentially thrown out after a bombshell revelation. Gina had been authorising payments to witnesses, more than $500,000 in total, including to Rose's ex-husband. The State Solicitor General says that the sheer size of some of the payments reinforces suspicions that they were designed, at the very least, to cast Rose in an unfavourable light. But he said he did not believe there was enough evidence to charge Mrs. Rinehart with either attempting to pervert the course of justice or with contempt of the coroner's court. A further review by the state's Attorney General finds the same thing.
There's nothing in the Australian legal system which says that you can't pay expenses of witnesses. Now, I think this went so far beyond what anyone could have reasonably regarded as reasonable expenses, and the nature of the evidence given was so bizarre. But nonetheless, there was no evidence that there had been a criminal offence committed.
And in the end, the coroner's findings surprised almost no one. Lang had died of natural causes.
How humiliating to lose. To find that, no, actually your father was an old man and he was ill.
But despite all of this drama, the fight between the pair was far from over. There was still the small matter of the Hancock fortune and how that would be shared between Gina and Rose. At the same time as Gina was pushing for an inquest into Lang's death, Gina and Rose were fighting over the Hancock estate. And when the dust settled in 2003, 11 years after Lang's death, and the chips were counted, Rose would get the real estate, the mansion at Preda Moor, while Gina would walk away with control of the empire. It's estimated that at the time of his death, Lang's estate was worth $150 million.
I mean, there's a myth that Gina inherited a very wealthy, successful mining enterprise, and she didn't.
But depending on who you ask about what exactly Gina inherited, the answer can be very different.
I became executive chair of Hancock Prospecting in 1992, when our company was unfortunately in a desperate and difficult position. Few assets were left. What assets that were left were mortgaged to the hilt or under legal threat or claim, including some tenement assets which only had temporary title.
Well, Gina doesn't like to be known as the girl who inherited the wealth. That really irks her. She doesn't like to be known as the sport little rich girl or the girl who was born with a silver spoon in her mouth.
Since I lost my parents and my husband, I had young children. The company was in terrible troubles, and all you could do was cope.
She obviously really objects to being called a mining heiress, but it's also inaccurate to describe her as a woman who's virtually come from nothing, because that's not quite accurate either, is it?
Well, no, it's not. She's taken that responsibility, to take it from where it is, which was nothing, absolutely nothing, hole in the ground, to where we are today.
I just want to find the quote from Pauline Hanson in the Senate when she stood up and did a tribute to Gina. And then I'll get your reaction to it. Okay.
She started from virtually nothing to become the wealthy individual she is today, thanks to her keen big business acumen.
Is it right that she started from virtually nothing?
I don't think anyone takes that comment seriously.
Without her sort of stepping in, taking it over, doing everything that needed to be done, the name Hancock Prospecting by 2025 may well have just disappeared altogether.
But they always would have had the wealth from those, one from the royalty deals and also the mineral resources in those tenements, right?
Yes, there were certainly royalties.
It's a very volatile period because you have a number of disagreements arising.
In order to understand the state of the company, I sat down with Jonathan Barrett, business editor at Guardian Australia.
I moved to Perth in the aftermath of the financial crisis. I spent about a decade there reporting, which included a period of running the Perth Bureau for the Australian Financial Review.
Okay, so let's turn to Hancock Prospecting and the state of the company when Gina inherited it after Lang's death in 1992.
Rinehart does take control of Hancock Prospecting. There are also proceedings where Hancock Prospecting is claiming money from the estate of Lang Hancock. His estate does end up being put into bankruptcy. And so that kind of lays that foundation for the story of this empire was built kind of out of a period where there was all sorts of fires or financial fires to put out. At the same time, we know that this was a very valuable royalty stream. So my own personal view is that there's kind of a middle ground here. There is an enormous royalty stream, and that can bankroll future projects. So there were very valuable assets left to her, and she has been able to build upon them.
In addition to these valuable assets, something happens in the early 2000s that is very fortuitous for Gina. The demand for iron ore booms.
You have the rise of China, the great demand for steel production. So you get a revenue stream from the royalties that was a few $1 million a year, and that turns into tens, into hundreds of millions of dollars a year, year after year.
Gina's wealth begins to soar. By 2006, she is a billionaire.
This is the iron ore, the mining era, and they're kind of taking over that billionaire status from some of the other professions. In fact, when I was in WA around 2010, I remember I was speaking to a tailor who was making really high-end suits. We're talking kind of $15,000, $20,000 suits. And I asked him, who buys these? And he said, it's really interesting. It used to be the stockbrokers, now it's the miners.
And all this wealth gives Gina opportunities that were never available to Lang. She is far richer than he ever was. And she uses this wealth to chase the dream that he left behind.
So the royalty streams weren't enough by themselves. And there is some kind of a reputation that is attached to building your own mine. She goes some way to fulfilling that.
I'd like to show you the Hope Downs North deposit. It's this deposit here, which is out the right of our car.
In 2007, she establishes a joint venture with mining company Rio Tinto, the same company that still pays royalty streams to Hancock Prospecting. Their mine in the Pilbara is named after Gina's mother.
To develop Hope Downs, it was so intense, there wasn't a weekend off. There were endless 16-hour days. There was occasional overnights at the office, but we did it.
And that becomes more valuable than the royalty streams, but presumably it's the royalty streams that has put her in a position to be able to strike such a deal.
Hope Downs is a massive success, and Gina's ascent begins.
The winner of the 2009 Telstra Australian Businesswoman of the Year is Gina Rinehart.
After the birth of my children, I think this has been the best night of my life. Thank you.
By 2010, she's Australia's richest woman. And by 2011, she sits alone at the top.
Gina Rinehart has topped this year's Business Review Weekly Rich List. She's the first woman to top the list and the first person to break the $10 billion barrier.
But a joint venture mine, even one that has propelled her to the top of the rich list, is still not enough for Gina Rinehart.
While it's 50-50, Rio Tinto retains what I would describe as organisational control. And so it doesn't quite fulfil that long-held ambition, but it's certainly a big step towards it.
During this time, she's also managed to secure initial investment for a new mega mine in the Pilbara, one that Hancock Prospecting has operational and majority control of. A mine called Roy Hill.
One of the biggest iron ore mines in Australia. It's also one of the largest in the world.
I congratulate Roy Hill on securing the largest mining finance package in world history.
To get the mine off the ground, Gina secures a record $7.2 billion in debt financing from banks and foreign agencies. It's the largest such deal ever struck in the world.
If she'd done what Lang had done, it would still be in the ground.
What do you mean by that, if she'd done what Lang had done?
She inherited the opportunity with the peggings. It's like having roads and no cars. Not much point having roads if you have no cars. She went around on her own, the biggest loan raising ever in Australia. Not by a board, by Gina Rinehart herself. She raised the money. She dug the mine. She hired the geologists. She hired the engineers. And she turned the peggings into Australia's second biggest export.
And that's kind of seen as the moment that Gina Rinehart's dreams of fulfilling Lang Hancock's ambition to be a miner are fulfilled.
And achieving something that he not only didn't achieve, but didn't get near to achieving. So, he'd be very proud of his daughter.
And with a 70% share of those operations, that then becomes a very, very valuable asset. And so she has now multiple revenue streams, the royalties, but also the ownership rights and the profits that are derived from that. And that puts her wealth kind of into the stratosphere in Australia.
The one and only Roy Hill Choir.
Heart of the outback, where the iron ore lies. Our chairman's vision guides us, reaching for the skies, with long-serving staff shining year after year.
Diesel.
We celebrate.
Diesel. With the diesel. Diesel. Every pump is diesel.
How are we going for diesel?
Half a tank, because it gets... I can do that.
The nearest major town to Roy Hill is called Newman. From there, it's about a 60-minute drive north to the mine. The landscape between Newman and Roy Hill is reasonably untouched. It's a fairly barren landscape, and we're looking out the windows looking for wildlife. There's not much to see. But as you near Roy Hill,
Gina paints a lot of her mining equipment pink, and all this multi-storey steel structure is painted pink. And these huge trucks, like these monster trucks, are tipping piles of ore, and there's dust everywhere, and it's kind of incredible to see.
You're struck by this enormous bridge over the road. It's like something from a theme park. It looks like a roller coaster. That's the thing that first strikes you. Woo! There's a lot.
All going over that pink conveyor belt.
As you get closer, you just see these vast piles of iron ore that are being mined. There are big lumbering haul trucks in the distance. The equipment is painted pink. It's got its own airport. You don't see any human life. You just see machinery chipping away at this ore.
I don't know, is it bigger than you imagined?
Yeah, 100%. This is enormous. Like, look how big this bridge is. It just keeps going.
Nothing has prepared me for the scale of what we see at Roy Hill and the amount of iron ore that's actually been exported from this mine 24/7.
It's not pretty though. But like the cost of that, what that must have been.
I think crucially to some people it is pretty, because Gina said beauty is an iron mine, so.
Oh yeah, that's true. It's funny, I think there is often this tendency to forget that the resources in the ground are not owned by private individuals. Technically, they're owned by every single person in Australia. But when we're talking about billions of dollars being earned by individuals, and not just Gina, there are others as well, I think there are questions that need to be asked here about whether we've got the balance right.
One of the critiques of the broader industries is that they have exploited a resource and sent it offshore without adding any production or value to it. And perhaps there should be a limit to the wealth that can be derived from that sort of venture. But as we've seen in Australia, there's almost no limit to the amount of wealth that can be derived from mining iron ore.
So here in Australia, we have certain individuals who have not just more wealth than everybody else, but inconceivably more wealth than everybody else, and so much wealth that if they gave it all away, they would wake up the next day and still be billionaires, right?
One person I wanted to speak to about this imbalance is Lynn Morgaine. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Oxfam.
30%, I think it's 31% of our billionaires here in Australia got that way as a result of inherited wealth. That's the first thing.
I'm optimistic about the fact that there is much more of an appetite these days for these conversations, and there's much more awareness that, hey, actually, that's not right. You know, that one person's fortunes could, you know, quadruple over the course of a few years, and they could go from being, you know, a 30 billionaire to a 40 or 50, you know, like people recognise that there's something sort of seriously wrong with that, and that it doesn't actually have anything to do with their merits as a person. You know, it's not to do with their productivity or their smarts or any of those things.
And again, our conversation came back to this question of Gina's inheritance.
I absolutely see it as inherited, but not just that. She has benefited from extraordinarily favourable public policy settings, and she has demonstrated a very strong interest in influencing those public policy settings to her benefit. So I would definitely say one has to look at the context in which that wealth was created to make a determination as to what drove it and what caused it. But, you know, in the case of that particular fortune, we all can pretty transparently see the way the mineral sector works and so on and so forth. You know, this is not about evenness. And in fact, you know, many of us believe that those industries are deeply detrimental to our community, to life as we know it. So many of us think that they're really, really troubling. And we do have a real issue here about the fact that our sovereign wealth is very much based on an unreconciled colonialist exploitation. So there's very unique problems here. So it's no coincidence that those people who wield the most economic power, like Gina Rinehart, do so because of their investments in fossil fuels and related industries. Whatever your views might be about who owns those resources, what is unquestionable is that they belong with Australians and with our community, and I would say in many cases with traditional owners.
I still love Gina. I still think she has lingering regard for me.
Throughout the course of making this series, I've had hundreds of conversations about Gina Rinehart with dozens of people, all with different points of view. But no one sees Gina Rinehart that I've spoken to like John Singleton does. He's seen a side of Gina Rinehart that few people have, that some even doubt exists.
She saved my life. Only person that ever saved my life.
And that's why you call her your Florence Nightingale, is that right?
Yes, yes.
He was telling me this story. He was in France, in Saint-Tropez, for a celebration when he had heart problems.
I had to get home within 2 days or I was gone. Gina sat with me that night sat with me by the window looking at the festivities, my heart jumping out of my body. She sat with me all day and night that night. I was shaking, I was frightened. My heart was going over 250 beats a minute. And she sat and held my hand, just so soft, so lovely. Just talking about Dad and life and how much Dad loved me and da-da-da-da. It was just the most sympathetic time I've spent in my life. Then Gina got her jet, da-da-da. And of course, she's doing it out of friendship, not counting up what it costs. I had to get to St Vincent's. I had 2 days. I made it because Gina did all that. Just did it. Whether she would have done it for anyone, I think so. I think she'd still do it. So I'm a bit biased. It's a pity in a way. If Gina were more normal and not so eccentric, not so persistent, I think she'd be much loved. It's now going to take people to realise through broadcasts like this and others that what Gina has done, yes, she's different, but she's different in a wonderful way.
You said that you thought if Gina was a bit more normal, she'd have a bit more success. I wanted to ask you what you meant by that.
Well, Gina is her own person. But she learned from Lang. Lang set out, I think, to just be hated by them all because he thought they were such peasant-minded nobodies. He just treated them like shit. Excuse the language, but there's no other word. Gina's not rude to the politicians. She's tolerant. The facade you've got to keep. If you're meeting these guys that think they run the world or run Australia, you've got to treat them with respect. And Gina does that. She doesn't think anything of them in private. Nothing's changed since Lang's day. But she gives them time of day. She listens to their point of view. She includes it in some of her business plans. So she's far more realistic than Lang was. She's bewildered at the criticism she gets, but she does things that, like her dad did, that must attract criticism. There's an unworldliness about her which I find naive but terrific. You can actually speak like this and be gentle about things.
And unworldliness, what sort of things do you mean that have surprised you?
The will situation, the inheritance. And I think when you ask the bigger question about why would the family fight over money, I just don't know. They're all rich anyway.
Next time on Gina. At the same time as Gina's personal fortune was soaring, her family was falling apart.
No one, Gina's closest friends, just can't see why you'd want to worry about inheritance.
What do you make of her legal dispute with her children?
Well, as is everything with Gina, it's all about winning. Even if they are your children, you can be in a head-to-head contest with them and not take a backward step. At no point do we say, well, they are my flesh and blood, and I'm not going down this path.
Your relationship now is what?
Oh, well, I haven't seen her in person other than in the courtroom, and we didn't speak then. So, non-existent. And, yeah, we're not even emailing.
In the next episode, you'll hear an intimate conversation with Gina's son, John Hancock.
I think if you dealt with all the pain that my mother's given me over the years, you wouldn't be able to live life. You've got to try and just think. Sometimes forget about it. Sometimes, I think if you dwell on it too much, what she's done and the years it's gone on for, I don't think that's a very good place to be.
Guardian Australia contacted Gina Rinehart and Hancock Prospecting, but they declined to comment. Guardian Australia also spoke with Rose Porteous. She declined to be interviewed. Gina is recorded on Parramac and Ghana land. The series producer is Joe Koning, and the executive producer is Shelley Hepworth. Head of audio is Miles Martignoni. This episode was also produced by Luca Itamani, who assisted with research and fact-checking, and Jess Hamilton. Sound design was by Joe Koning.